The North Sea, cold, gray, and restless. For centuries, we've looked at it as a boundary, separating Britain from the European mainland, but beneath these waves lies a secret, a world lost to memory, yet once alive with forests, rivers, and voices. This was Doggerland, a place where mammoths roamed, where giant deer grazed, and where humans built their lives. They hunted, they gathered, they told stories around firelight, never imagining that their world would someday vanish beneath the sea. Unlike Atlantis, Doggerland is no myth. Its traces emerge from fishermen's nets, stone tools, fragments of bone, even human skulls drawn from the seabed. Each artifact whispers of a land that once stretched across what is now open water, but how did it drown? What forces of nature slowly swallowed an entire kingdom, turning fertile plains into seafloor? Was it the melting of the Ice Age glaciers, the creeping rise of seas over generations, or the final cataclysm of a great tsunami that erased it all in one devastating moment? Tonight, we search for the lost kingdom beneath the North Sea, a place scholars call the real Atlantis of prehistory, and as we uncover its story, we may find more than just echoes of the past. We may glimpse our own future, written in the waves. The North Sea, cold, gray, and restless. For centuries, we've seen it as nothing more than a boundary, a strip of water separating the British Isles from continental Europe. But now, the waves conceal something far stranger. Beneath the surface, stretching from the English coast to the lowlands of Denmark and the Netherlands, lies the ghost of a vanished world. A place archaeologists call Doggerland. Unlike Atlantis, this is not a legend or a cautionary tale. Doggerland was real, and once it was alive with forests, rivers, and human voices. Imagine standing on a grassy hillside. But where you stand now is under 60 feet of water. Imagine rivers teeming with fish, now hidden beneath mud and silt at the bottom of the sea. This was not a barren wasteland, but a heartland of prehistoric Europe. A place where mammoths roamed, where red deer and/or ox grazed, and where communities of humans built their lives. And yet today, all that remains are fragments, stone tools pulled up in fishing nets, bones of long-vanished animals. The occasional human skull lifted from the seabed, its story silenced by millennia. These are the echoes of a civilization that once thrived on land now claimed by the sea. But here lies the mystery. How can we know the story of a people who left no written records? How can we reconstruct a world erased not by time alone, but by water? This is where modern science enters the tale. With sonar and seismic surveys, scientists can be beneath the waves, turning ripples of sound into ghostly images of lost rivers and floodplains. With underwater archaeology, divers descend into the cold and the dark, hoping to find evidence that speaks of daily life, of tools, of rituals, of survival. And with sediment cores drilled from the seafloor, even grains of pollen can be read like a diary, revealing forests that once stood, flowers that once bloomed, and climates that once shifted. Piece by piece, they are rebuilding a forgotten continent, but still questions linger. What was it truly like to live there, at the edge of the Ice Age world? What did these people believe? How did they adapt? And how did they face the rising waters that crept closer with every generation? Archaeologists still wonder whether we will ever capture the full story, or if Doggerland will always remain half-seen, a shadow preserved in the mud and silt of the North Sea. And so, our journey begins here, with a real land swallowed, by waves with a mystery not born from myth, but from memory written in the earth itself. At the end of the last ice age, the world was changing. Vast sheets of ice, which for tens of thousands of years had locked up oceans, began to melt. Sea levels rose slowly but relentlessly, but before the waters came, a vast expanse. A fertile land was revealed. This was Doggerland, a bridge of earth connecting Britain to continental Europe. It stretched for hundreds of miles, forming plains, hills, rivers, and marshlands where now only restless waves remain. How do we know what it looked like? The answers lie buried in mud and pollen. When scientists drill into the seabed, they find layers of ancient sediment, tiny grains of pollen trapped for millennia. From them, a forgotten landscape emerges. Great forests of birch and pine, meadows where wildflowers once swayed. Winding rivers flowing toward the sea, lined with reeds and marshes, it was not a wasteland, but a thriving paradise. And within this paradise lived giants. Woolly mammoths still roamed the plains, their tusks curving like ivory crescents. Enormous elk, with antlers spanning 12 feet across, grazed on the open meadows. Herds of aurochs, the wild ancestors of cattle, moved through the lowlands. Along the waterways, beavers built their dams while packs of wolves stalked silently through the trees. It was a land both beautiful and dangerous, untamed but abundant. But Doggerland was not only a world of animals. It was home to people, our ancestors of the Mesolithic age. For a long time, the stereotype of these people was primitive cave dwellers. But archaeology tells a very different story. They were skilled hunters, gatherers, and fishers, moving with the seasons and reading the rhythms of the land. They crafted microliths, tiny, razor-sharp stone blades that could be set into wooden shafts to make arrows and spears. They built huts from wood and hide. They created ornaments from bone, amber, and shells. Evidence not only of survival, but of artistry and meaning. Their world was deeply tied to nature. They knew which plants could heal and which could kill. They followed migrating herds and fished the rivers with bone harpoons. Some discoveries even suggest that ritual and belief may have shaped their lives. A carved deer antler, a fragment of human skull, beads buried with care, hinting at ceremonies or perhaps a spiritual relationship with the land and animals around them. Doggerland was not a forgotten swamp. It was a living, breathing society. For thousands of years, it stood as the crossroads of Europe, a place where humans and animals thrived together in a landscape that today lies silent beneath the North Sea, and yet as fertile and vibrant as it was. Its fate was already written in the ice and in the tides, for the waters were rising. And the people of Doggerland, whether they knew it or not, were living in a world destined to drown. The story of Doggerland's end was not one of sudden catastrophe, but of slow, relentless change. As the Ice Age drew to a close, glaciers that once towered across northern Europe began to melt. The ice sheets were vast, thousands of feet thick, locking away unimaginable amounts of water. And as they thawed, the seas began to rise, slowly at first, then faster. The land bridge that had connected Britain to Europe was shrinking. One tide, one season, one lifetime at a time. This was not a disaster in a single night. It was a tragedy stretched across millennia. For every generation that lived in Doggerland, the world felt a little smaller. Imagine you are a child of Doggerland. Your grandparents tell stories of forests that stretched far to the east, of hunting grounds now swallowed by the sea. Your parents remember when the river mouth was a day's walk further inland. And you, as you grow, see the shoreline creeping closer with every passing year. The transformation was subtle but merciless. Rich marshlands where people fished and gathered reeds vanished beneath the waves, fertile plains that once carried mammoth herds became saltwater shallows. Villages had to move inland, again and again, until there was no further to go. Yet nature was not always gentle. At times, the sea surged with terrifying speed. Scientists call these events meltwater pulses, sudden bursts when vast glaciers collapsed into the ocean, raising global sea levels by meters in a matter of decades. For the people of Doggerland, such moments would have been devastating. Fields lost in a single lifetime, entire river valleys drowned within memory. By around 8,000 years ago, Doggerland was no longer a broad continent. It had become a patchwork of shrinking islands battered by waves. What was once the heartland of Europe's Mesolithic hunters was turning into a labyrinth of estuaries and tidal flats. In the end, only a high ridge remained. The place we now call the Dogger Bank, a shallow sandbar in the North Sea. Beneath its waves lies the memory of a world that endured for thousands of years, yet was slowly erased. The tragedy of Doggerland is not just that it disappeared, but that it disappeared so slowly. Generations lived and died watching their homeland slip away, not with fire and ash, but with silence, with water creeping further inland each year, until one day, the stories of what lay beyond the waves were all that remained. But Doggerland's story did not end with the slow drowning alone. For around 8,200 years ago came a final, devastating blow. Far to the north, off the coast of Norway, the seabed gave way. In a single cataclysmic moment, an area the size of Scotland collapsed into the deep. This was the Storegga Slide, one of the largest underwater landslides ever recorded in human history. The Earth itself shifted, releasing more than 3,000 cubic kilometers of rock and sediment. The force was unimaginable. And with that collapse, the sea rose up in fury. A mega-tsunami swept across the North Atlantic. Waves tens of meters high thundered toward the coasts of Norway, Scotland, and beyond. And to the south, what little remained of Doggerland stood directly in its path. For the scattered communities who still clung to the shrinking islands, this was no gradual encroachment, this was terror. Sudden, violent, and absolute. Imagine standing on the shoreline, you hear a distant roar, a wall of water rising against the horizon. Within moments, villages, forests, hunting grounds are obliterated. Entire landscapes swept away in a single day. When the waters receded, Doggerland was gone, its last ridges and islands swallowed by the sea, leaving behind only shallow banks and shifting sands. The slow tragedy of generations had ended in an instant of violence. For the people of Doggerland, there was no returning. Their homeland had vanished forever beneath the North Sea. Today, all that remains of this once great kingdom is silence, the restless waves above, and fragments of memory buried deep beneath the seafloor. For thousands of years, Doggerland lay hidden, silent beneath the restless tides of the North Sea, its forests and rivers, its people and stories erased from memory. But the sea is a way of giving back fragments of what it once took. In the waters between Britain and the Netherlands, fishermen began hauling their nets, expecting only cod or herring. Instead, they pulled up something unexpected: a sharpened antler harpoon, a fragment of a human skull. bones of mammoths and giant elk. Each catch was a message from a lost world these fishermen became unknowingly. The first archaeologists of Doggerland. Today, the hunt continues with far more precision. Research vessels scan the seafloor with sonar, mapping ridges, valleys, and ancient riverbeds. Now drowned beneath the waves, geologists analyze seismic data, layer by layer reconstructing the shape of a vanished continent. Divers descend into the cold, murky waters, retrieving tools carved from flint, fragments of huts long decayed, hauling grains locked in sediments, whispering of forests that no longer exist. Piece by piece, a picture emerges, not of myth but of memory. Scientists now create stunning 3D reconstructions, showing Doggerland as it may once have been: rolling hills, winding rivers, vast wetlands alive with animals, and the faint traces of camps where people once gathered around firelight. The discoveries may be small: a shard of bone, a stone blade, a layer of ancient peat. Yet each fragment carries weight. Each one is a bridge linking our world to theirs, reminding us that beneath the familiar gray waters of the North Sea lies a kingdom that once pulsed with life, and the search is not over. For every artifact pulled from the depths, there are countless others still waiting, hidden in the silence of the seabed. Doggerland's story is a journey from paradise to oblivion. Once it was a land of rivers and forests, filled with mammoths and deer, and with people who thrived for thousands of years. Then came the slow drowning, the relentless rising of the sea, and finally, the great wave that erased it from the map forever. Doggerland is more than a forgotten chapter of prehistory. It is a warning etched into the ocean floor, a reminder of how fragile even the grandest worlds can be when faced with the power of nature. It teaches us that climate change is not only a modern concern, but a force that has shaped human destiny since the very beginning. And so, the lost kingdom beneath the North Sea whispers to us still. Its silence carries a message: nothing lasts forever. Every civilization, no matter how mighty, exists at the mercy of the earth and the waters around it. It leaves us with a haunting question: how many other worlds lie hidden, still asleep beneath the waves, waiting for us to uncover their stories? If you found this journey into the past meaningful, share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you see Doggerland as a distant tragedy, or as a mirror reflecting our own uncertain future? And if you wish to explore more forgotten civilizations, mysteries, and echoes of the ancient world, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you won't miss the next chapter in our search for the lost past. Thank you for watching, and until next time, let the questions linger.